Hello everyone, thanks for clicking on my video. Um, Today I'm going to be taking apart a Game Boy Micro. This is the Game Boy Micro that was released in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. It's really good condition, just the faceplate's a bit dirty. Just taking an overall look of the console. Uh, to take apart a Game Boy Micro, you only need two bits. This one is a 2.0. I think it's a Philips. Yeah, a Philips. And then the other one is a Y3 tri-wing bit. These are the two bits I use to open up Game Boy Micros. You might use different ones. You're going to start off with the Philips first. The first thing you want to do when taking apart a Game Boy Micro is to take off the faceplate. There are two holes that you want to push down into. You can use the Phillips head bit to push down on the inner clasps of the Game Boy Micro to remove the faceplate. As you can see there, the faceplate kind of just pushes itself out. Sometimes that doesn't happen. You need to get a fingernail under there. I'm just showing off the condition of the console. The first screw you want to unscrew is the battery compartment. It's a Phillips head. I start by using my index finger to push the battery compartment outward while I unscrew, because if you're just unscrewing, it won't come out completely. You want to remove the battery from any device that you're trying to open up. You don't want to short circuit anything. I use this pill container that I got from the dollar store for holding my screws, because there are quite a few screws in the Game Boy Micro. Not a whole lot, just a bit. As you can see here, there are 4 tri-wing screws that go around the console, so I'm going to swap over to the tri-wing bit. You want to be really careful undoing these screws. They're very small and very easy to strip. So you'll see here, I kind of rock my screwdriver back and forth to loosen up those screws. This is a mint console, so no one has been into this console. So those screws are factory, I guess, screwed on there. So getting those screws to turn is a bit difficult. So you definitely want to be careful not to strip them. I find that rocking back and forth is the best way for me. So you have 2 on the top and then 2 on the side. This is a Game Boy Micro that I had sold to someone. They wanted a USB-C mod, so I'm taking apart the Game Boy Micro, and I will put a USB-C mod in later. Definitely be careful with these screws. They're small. You don't want to lose them. After that, you have 2 more tri-wing screws that you want to unscrew. Um, they're silver, and they hold the back onto the frame. So with with every screw that I unscrew, I use the same technique. If I feel resistance when trying to unscrew, I just rock the screwdriver back and forth to get the screw started. These screws are kind of long. They sink into the console because they go all the way through. So when you're unscrewing, make sure you unscrew all the way, and then you can lift the screw out. Obviously, when I'm recording, I'm going to be struggling. Usually it doesn't take me this long, but when you pull out the camera, things don't always go according to plan. With those screws out, you can remove the back frame or metal piece. From here on out, all the other screws are going to be Phillips, so I'll be changing my bit in a second. Right now I'm just taking a look at the console, kind of admiring a fresh new untouched board. There are 3 Phillips head screws that hold in the center frame. You're going to want to take those out next. Alright, after that's done, you're ready to take off the frame. Right here I'm showing you that there's a tiny little latch that holds the frame down right behind the L trigger button. When removing the frame, you gotta be careful because that latch will hold the frame in place. All you have to do is push down on the L trigger and the frame will come off. With this step, you remove the trigger buttons as well. You don't want to lose the volume rocker. It's not permanently attached to the frame, but in most cases it will stay stuck to the frame. Okay, what I like to do next is to remove the rest of the console from the front shell. I push down on the screen. You definitely don't want to put too much pressure down on that screen. In this step, you can also remove the start and select buttons along with the power switch. As you can see there, it fell off. Just going to move it off to the side. Alright, now I'm grabbing another case for the screws. The next screw we're going to take is the cartridge shield, I believe is what it's called. It's just one screw holding it in place. And then the final screws are the 3 screws that hold the motherboard to the front frame. Alright, those are all the screws. After that, everything should come apart relatively easy. You definitely want to be careful with the start and select. There's a thin ribbon cable that connects the start and select board to the main motherboard. Go ahead and take the start and select off of the frame. In here you want to slide the screen through that opening of the frame, and now you've fully removed the frame from the board. And there you have it. The screen is held in place by two latches. This latch right here is responsible for putting the image on the screen. The small one there is responsible for the backlight. And that is the final product. Alright, I have the USB-C port attached. Just showing off some of my handiwork here. Properly soldered in place. Shiny solder, little solder balls. And now we can start putting the Game Boy Micro back together. First thing you want to do is attach the screen back to the motherboard. I find this easier. Some people will put the screen on at a later time in the assembly process. I think it's just a little bit more difficult. When you do it this way, you have a lot more room to work with to put the screen back in. You definitely want to make sure that everything is seated correctly. You don't want to put the micro back together and realize that the screen wasn't seated properly when you turn on your micro and the image looks all distorted. Now we're ready to place the motherboard back into the frame. Make sure all your buttons and speaker are in place. You just want to slide that in there. Make sure you put the start and select where they belong properly. Seated in there. Make sure everything falls into place. Now we want to start by putting those 3 screws back in so that the motherboard can be attached to the frame. You want to be gentle with this because the frame is very brittle. You don't want to put too much force into it. You'll see here that when I get to a point of resistance, I kind of knock on the screw to tighten it. Just a little knocking to the end to make sure that you have a good set screw. You don't want to over tighten it. You could definitely crack the frame that way. Also, when you put the screws in, when you're threading it in, you kind of want to go backwards until you feel a small click into place, and then when you feel that click, the screw will drop a little bit, and then you can start tightening the screw. Alright, the next thing we want to do is put the cartridge shielding back on. Remember, it's only held on by 1 screw. So once again, with all the screws, you want to back, turn it, and then start tightening it. And when you get to a little bit of resistance, just knock it a few times. Here you can see that the motherboard wasn't completely pushed up against the frame, so I still had a bit more room to put that screw in. You want to make sure that the board is completely up against the frame. You don't have much room for any gaps, or else the shell won't close properly. At this point, we're going to start putting the start and select buttons back into place, and we're going to throw the front shell on. Here you want to put the start and select buttons in and the power switch. A lot of times I forget to put the power switch on, and I had to take the front shell off and go back and put the power switch down. Right here, the technique you want to do is make sure that you get the front shell underneath that cartridge shielding, and you'll know that it's seated properly when the start and select buttons jut out perfectly. Alright, we're going to start by putting it looks like the left trigger, but it's actually the right trigger. You want to put the right trigger on because it'll stay in place, and then you'll put the left trigger on and you sort of have to hold this one in place. Next, you'll put the center frame, but don't forget the volume rocker. When you put the center frame into place, it should click in and it'll hold your triggers on. That latch will hold the L trigger in place, and then you're ready to put the 3 Phillips screws back in. I decided to make this tutorial because I hear a lot of people attempt to open up their micro and they end up damaging either the ribbon cables or the plastic frame. There are a few good tutorials on how to open up your Game Boy Micro. I'll see if I can link some videos either in the description or later in the video. This is a bit longer than I wanted it to be, but I wanted to make an in-depth guide on how to open these. I did want to get this video out before doing my mod videos because I can't really expect people to know how to open up the micro without releasing a tutorial video on that before making a mod video and expecting them to be able to do the mod. Alright, so the frame's in place. You want to make sure it's seated in the shell properly. And then you're ready to add on the back shell. This one's going to be held in place with the 2 tri-wing screws. Right here, I'm just checking to make sure that the shell was properly seated, and then you can start screwing in those screws. These screws are particularly long, so you want to make sure that you push them in all the way and then start tightening them. So you'll see here that it kind of just drops through the console. I started screwing too early and then it dropped. A few back turns, you'll hear the click and then you start tightening. And when you start to feel resistance, you give it a few knocks to make sure it's good and tight. Alright, the final piece is the 4 teeny tiny tri-wing screws. These are sometimes a pain if you've had someone open up a micro already and then try to screw these screws in. Sometimes they're a bit difficult to go back in because whoever tried putting the screw in almost always strips the threading. Luckily with this one, I know no one's ever been in this micro, so putting the screw in wasn't too difficult. You can sort of see the weird technique I use to screw these in. I hold the micro. You want to make sure you clamp it closed because the two shells, the front and the back, they each have the holes drilled in them. You want to make sure that you squeeze the 2 shells together so that those holes line up, and then you can feed the screw through it. So that's why I hold the micro the way I do. A few back turns, and then you'll hear the click. You start to tighten, and then here you want to be really, really careful with your knocking. I use like 2 fingers to do the knocking because stripping these tiny little screws is very easy. It kind of doesn't make sense that they use tri-wing because with small screws, I guess you would want a few extra things to catch onto when you're screwing. So maybe a Phillips head would have been better. Alright, so onto the last screw. I've probably taken apart, I don't know, 40 micros by now. So I have a pretty good idea of which screws go where. I know just about every screw that goes in the micro and all the steps in taking one apart and putting it back together. Alright, here I'm gonna grab a Q-tip that I cut the ends off of and the battery. Some people are really tempted just to use a screwdriver to push that connector all the way in. This is pretty scary because you can short the battery by doing that. If the metal piece of the screwdriver makes contacts with both wires. So I use a small Q-tip there. I push it into place. Make sure your wire is tucked in properly. Switch over to the Phillips. I use my index finger and I push the battery door. I push it in the closed position while I'm screwing. Give it a few knocks, make sure it's nice and tight. And we're going to put a fresh new faceplate on this micro. The customer wanted a silver one, so I'm using one that I got in a recent purchase. This one's not OEM, this is a sparkly silver faceplate. We're just testing to make sure everything works. We put everything back together, the LCD was seated properly. And now I'm going to check the USB-C mod, make sure the micro charges. There we are. We see the blue lights indicating that the battery is charging. And that completes the disassemble and assembling of the Game Boy Micro. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it wasn't too long. And good luck trying to modify your Game Boys. Have a great day.